So continuing on with our labor versus management. In other words, unions versus robber barons. That's basically what we're talking about here. Both sides had points. Both sides had weapons they used against each other. And that's what this section is. Let's talk about the union weapons, okay? Strikes were the most powerful union weapon, and they still are to this day. A strike is whenever you want higher pay or better working conditions, and you tell the boss, I'm not going to work until you provide me with these things I'm demanding. Normally, these are accompanied by picketing. Okay, you all know what picketing is. It's when you have a sign and you're walking around and chanting something. You've probably seen a lot of that lately on the news in the protests and things like that leading up to the 2020 election. And the other thing is sabotage. Okay, see, whenever a group of people go on strike, there's people that want their jobs, people that have been waiting in the wings, all right? And as soon as they go on strike, those people will show up and try to offer their services to the boss. So to make sure that they couldn't actually use these replacement workers, the last thing workers would do before they left the factory, in many cases, would be to sabotage the machines. Now, if you don't know what sabotage means, it means that you intentionally break something or intentionally make something go wrong. The word sabotage comes from an ancient word from Europe, and the original word was sabot, okay? So this is like 1600s or 1700s, somewhere around there. And there was a group of people in Europe that used to make wooden shoes, okay? Believe it or not, they still make wooden shoes today, okay? And that was the fashion, that was the style. But they were made by hand. So these were artisans, these were masters of their craft, and they got paid by how many shoes they could produce. Well, one of these factory owners, these robber barons in Europe over there, he bought some new machines, and these new machines would speed up the process. Now, once he bought the new machines, they can make shoes like 20 times faster or something. So the boss wanted to give these artisans, these craftsmen, 20 times less money. Now you could kind of see the boss's point, because he spent all the money on this machine and he wants to increase his profit margin. And you can kind of see the labor unions' thoughts as well. They were used to making a certain amount per shoe and they wanted to keep it that way. So what they did is this labor union took their wooden shoes that they were wearing before they left the factory, and they turned the machines on, these brand new machines that this boss had built, had brought to the factory. So as the machines are running, they take their shoes off and they threw their shoes, their sabot, okay, that's what the name of the shoe is, into the machine. And it broke the machines all up, okay, and that's where the word sabotage comes from. It's basically messing with stuff in a factory, or you could do sabotage on anything, really. So this is picketing right here. It's an example of that in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Another one of the union weapons is closed shop, which is a vocabulary word. So closed shop says that in order to work at this factory, you have to be a union member. If you're not a union member, you can't work here. And if the boss hires non-union members, then everybody goes on strike. Okay, that's closed shop. That makes it where we have the maximum amount of power as a union. Okay, if everybody in the shop goes on strike at the same time and demands the same things, then your collective bargaining power is huge. If only half the members are on strike and the other half are not in the union, they just keep working. Well, the boss can kind of limp along with his business until the union members run out of money. Workers boycotted management as well, okay? Maybe they're not only gonna go on strike, but they're also not gonna buy the products of their own company, okay? Black workers typically became scabs, okay? Now, a scab is a replacement worker. You remember we talked about, when union members go on strike, there are people waiting to get those jobs. Well, those people are called scabs. Now, why were black people the scabs typically? Well, you remember I said they weren't allowed in unions for a long time. So it was hard for them to actually learn the skills they need to be in the union. And because they were black and not skilled workers, that's a double whammy if you're trying to join a union. So because of that, whenever the white guys went on strike, black people said, I'll do their job. And they did a really great job. But the unionist, nativist, the nativist union members hated them because these black scabs were undermining their whole strike. They were basically making their strike mean nothing. Now, why did black people do a really good job? Because they wanted the job after the strike is over. They want the boss to say, hey man, this guy did a great job. Whenever the white people were all off on strike, I'm going to keep them on, okay? So, on the test, I'm going to ask you why black people were most often the scabs. And the answer is they weren't allowed into the unit's apprenticeship programs that often. All right, we talked about the union weapons. Now we're going to talk about the employer weapons. So we're talking about robber baron weapons here, right? All right, robber barons often used the blacklist, okay? Now, the word blacklist means a group of people that you are not supposed to hire because they're not trustworthy. So let's say I have a factory, and I find out that one of my employees is stealing, right? They're stealing whatever goods they're making, and they're bringing them home. So if I were a robber baron back then, I would call them in, and I would basically say you're fired, first of all. And the other thing, something you've probably seen in a movie, you ever seen somebody say, you'll never work in this town again, right? Okay, so what they do is the robber baron or the boss would write a letter or telegraph or phone call, something like that, or meet in person with all the other business owners. And they would literally make a list called the black list. And these are people that no factory was allowed to hire. Okay, and not unless you have no sense, right? It's a list of thieves. It's a list of union agitators, people that are leading unions and stuff like that. And it's meant as a weapon to keep the workers in line. The next weapon they had were lockouts, okay? Now, what's the last thing that strikers do before they go on strike to make sure the scabs can't come into the factory and work? They sabotage the factory. Remember that, right? So if the robber baron heard that the union is going to go on strike tomorrow, well, what kind of idiot would open up the factory and let them bust all the machines up, right? So what they would do is they would immediately kick everybody out of the factory, or if they called a strike, they would kick them out of the factory that day, and they would lock the doors, they would hire guards, and then they would hire scabs. Okay, so who's most likely to be a scab in the 1800s and early 1900s? Black people, right? Remember that. That's on your test. Okay, so lockout, close the factory, hire guards, hire scabs to replace the striking workers to keep the factory running. Unions were illegal. Okay, because of the Sherman Antitrust Act, unions were illegal. So presidents helped robber barons because they were getting their pockets lined by the robber barons, right? I'll give you $100,000 if you send in the Marines or the National Guard to put down this strike and make these guys go back to work. That was the kind of deals that were going on at this time. Other things that they used as weapons, these are the robber barons using this, is the injunction, okay? So robber baron pays a judge off. The judge orders these people to either go back to work or go to prison. That's an injunction. It's a legal order from a court telling you to do or not to do something. Okay, and the last weapon that the bosses would use is a yellow dog contract, which is the exact opposite of closed shop. Yellow dog, okay, they call it that because yellow means cowardly. Okay, so it's a cowardly dog contract. It says that you cannot be a labor union member if you work at this factory. Remember, closed shop says you must be a labor union member to work at this factory. So the opposite, they're going to make you sign this when you get the job. And if they find out that you are in a union, or talking about a union, or thinking about talking about a union, you're fired. And guess what you get put on? The blacklist. Okay? Y'all, that is the chapter. It's over now. So that was Immigrants and Workers. Good luck on your test.